Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I hope everyone had a good night's rest. Welcome to day 2 of our conference, Contemporary Approaches to Learning and Teaching. I think we had a fascinating day yesterday, and today I think we will continue to talk about similar issues in a slightly different format. We will begin this morning with a panel discussion. We'll have lots of different stakeholders represented. So we'll first, I think we'll talk a little bit about some of the key ideas from yesterday. I think all of you were able to join one parallel session, so it'd be good to hear what happened in the other sessions. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit more about just expectations of different stakeholders for the future of education and teaching and learning in particular. And after that, we will have 2 very special keynote speeches as well. So hopefully it's going to be a fascinating day. I thought just before we start out, I'll just very quickly share some of the things from yesterday that really were interesting to me. You may remember yesterday's first keynote presentation by Professor Simmons. I think one of the ideas that actually it is the skill, the ability to learn that is the fundamental skill that we really need to pay attention to. So the question is, what in the current schools and vocational schools and higher education, what supports the ability for students to learn and what maybe hinders it. And another idea that for deeper learning to happen, then we do need better assessments as well. That is really something that's missing right now. The second keynote speech yesterday about neuroscience and what are the implications for education, I found that was very interesting. I think one idea that I took from there was around inhibition. So, that children, and I think adults as well, sometimes we have existing ideas and sometimes they may be wrong. So then when we're solving new problems, it's important to inhibit or really to avoid that our existing ideas interfere with our thinking process. So it's interesting to explore that more, how that happens. And then the third keynote speech yesterday by Professor Kikas, I think we had a really interesting conversation about different kinds of teaching approaches, and that one of the things again from there was that when child-dominated teaching processes, sometimes they give too much freedom for children, and actually they are not good for children. It's difficult for children to learn when they have too much freedom. So it's a combination of child-centered and teacher-directed approaches that are actually most effective according to her research over a long period of time with the same cohort of children. So I think hopefully, yesterday was good. I think today we'll try to have more interaction with the audience. You'll be able to, share some of your key takeaways from yesterday, some of the key questions that you think we should talk about more today. So be prepared for that. And with that, I would like to basically just introduce. We had this one video clip yesterday. We'll have a few more today with different, I think, really inspiring, interesting Estonians and how the skills and competencies they have learned have really shaped their life and their world. So let's look at one short video.
Selleks, et selgitada võib-olla, mida sport mulle tänase seisuga andnud on või millised iseloomujooni ja omadusi ma endasse kannan, peaksime vaatama tagasi lapsepõlve. Ehk spordiga ma olen tegelenud viimased 35 aastat, proovinud erinevaid spordialasid ja loomulikult enne kui põhialani kulturism jõudsin, sai nii ühte kui teist erinevat proovitud. Aga mida sport kokkuvõttes mulle on andnud ja õpetanud? Kindlasti distsipliini, kindlasti eesmärkini jõudmist, kindlasti ka seda, et ära anna alla, kui kohe asjad ei õnnestu. Ja kui ma olen võtnud kaasa need iseloomujooned ka teistesse eluvaldkondadesse, milleks on äri, milleks on inimeste koolitamine tänu juba pikale kogemusele, mida ma täna edasi annan, siis see võimaldab sul elus hakkama saada väga erinevatel spordialadel, sest need põhitõed, milliseid iseloomujooni sport annab, on hea kasutada ära ükskõik millises eluvaldkonnas.
And now I would like to invite our panelists to the stage. So please join me on the stage, and then I will introduce everyone.
It's okay.
So I'm very excited that we have very different stakeholders represented here, and all of them, I think, have very important ideas to contribute about how teaching and learning should change. So I will just very briefly introduce. I think all of them would. I think the introductions could be much longer because I think they've accomplished many things, but I'll just keep it very brief because otherwise we'd spend too long just with introductions. But so next to me here is Ferre Windi. So he represents school students. He's the member of the board of the Organizing Bureau of European School Student Unions. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, next is Caroline Sundberg. She is the vice president of the European Student Union and represents students, I think, at all levels, right?
Yes, or upper secondary. Like after Obesus, like students, we represent the students. So the students are involved in higher education across
welcome.
Europe. Yes.
Glad to have you here. Thank you. Then next we have Joke van der Leu-Roord.
Fantastic.
She represents educators, and she is the founder and special advisor at the European Association of History Educators. So welcome, and thank you for joining the panel. Next, representing school leaders, we have Clive Byrne. Welcome. He's the director of National Association of Principals and Deputy Principals. Then we have employers representative. Welcome, Arnold de Boer. He's the advisor for social affairs at the European Association for Craft, Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. And finally, welcome Agnes Roman, trade unions representative. Agnes is the advisor of the Education and Training Committee at the European Trade Union Confederation, and also the senior coordinator for education and training policy at the European Trade Union Committee for Education. I hope that was right. We will begin by thinking a little bit about what happened yesterday and what the key ideas were from yesterday. But I think just before I will ask a few people to summarize some of the key takeaways from the parallel sessions, maybe let's just take 1 minute, and you can just briefly talk to the person that you're sitting next to, and just think like, what are the key ideas that really resonated with you from yesterday? What are your key takeaways from yesterday? So just take 1 minute to briefly share that with the person sitting next to you, if that's okay. So thank you everyone. This was very brief, but basically just to get ourselves to to think what were some of the key ideas from yesterday. As you noticed yesterday, we also had a couple of artists with us who were visualizing some of the key ideas of the session. So they not only managed to visualize some of the key ideas at the keynotes and the parallel sessions, but they also put together a short video. So now we'll have a chance to look at a very quick video of some of the key ideas from yesterday. So let's look at that. So that was just a very, quick, really nice visual reminder of some of the key ideas. I think when I had conversations with different people over dinner yesterday, then it was interesting to talk what ideas resonated, but it was also interesting to talk to people about what they think was sort of missing and what we should focus more on today. So we also felt that before we get started with the panel and reflecting on yesterday, but also moving beyond, we'll give an opportunity for everyone to just very quickly share your thoughts about what do you think. We have the panel today, we have some keynotes. What would you like to hear more about? So if we can have the slide. So there is this simple tool that we're going to have a word cloud. So some of the key words that you think both the panel and the keynote could really focus on today. So here's the one question: what would you like today's panel discussion and keynote presentations to focus on? You can write up to 3 words. So if you either with your phones or with your laptops or tablets, go to this website menti.com, and the first thing it's going to ask you is a code. So the code is 470631, and then you can just share some of the key ideas you think that we could focus. And obviously, just be very brief. And the ones that most people or like more people will repeat, then these words are going to come up, bigger on the screen. So let's take maybe a minute on that, and maybe that's going to give some more guidance to the panel as well, like how our conversation could evolve and what it might focus on. So let's take a minute. You can add a minute or 2 minutes.
When is the first words popping up?
We should be able to see it here live.
Yeah, students.
So more focus on students.
Good idea.
It's pretty amazing to see students at the center. I think it's absolutely the right focus. Learning, personalization. I think those are topics that I definitely discussed with people at the dinner table yesterday. Innovation as well. Creativity. Let's have maybe 10 or 20 more seconds, and then
So at least. Nice.
innovation, learning, personalization, creativity, mind shift. I will take a photo, so I'll be able to keep these
You have to be fast.
in front of me. Let's try to keep this in mind. I think obviously the other takeaway from this is we have obviously so many participants from different countries with different interests as well. So I think there are very many things in different interests and different topics that different people would like to be discussed. So, but maybe the larger ones will definitely try to address in terms of students, learning, creativity, innovation, personalization. And so we thought it would be fantastic to hear, basically as sort of context for our panel and the keynotes, just very briefly some of the key takeaways from the parallel sessions that we had yesterday, and then we can build the rest of our conversation on top of that. So I'll just check, do we have the microphones for the audience as well? I've asked a couple of people to summarize the key ideas, and then everyone in the audience, you can react and you can add your own questions and thoughts as well. I know, so Grete's here. I know you have to you have a lecture soon. So rather than going in the order of the first, second, and third parallel session, I'm wondering maybe I could ask Grete for you to go first. So you'll have a microphone. You were part of our parallel session on engaging stakeholders. So would you like to summarize quickly what were some of the key ideas for you from that session?
We were discussing in this session two different examples of how stakeholders could benefit education. They were at different levels of education. One targeted unemployment in Europe and really made a great effort in teaching actually more soft skills to the young people who had lost the hope to get a good career or future. And the second example considered a back-to-school program. Basically, idea that every adult people could go to the next school or the school of their children and give a guest lecture just to inspire students, to share experience, to share expertise, and help teachers to co-create how students could understand their future roles and what kind of areas are there in life. So and then we had some more theoretical discussions about how what we know from the theory, for example, from motivation and also mindset theory, how this knowledge could also help those stakeholders to get their message even better through, and also other way around. Some practical examples were really good, grown out from the field and from which academic system or academic education could actually learn already. So we're back, or we're not so far as some stakeholder in, for example, teaching soft skills. We can do that better also in ordinary schools. So basically, that were my points of inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Grete. Would anyone who attended the second parallel session yesterday like to add anything? I was there as well. I mean, I can just add very quickly. I think it was interesting to talk about how the world of education research and science can just come closer to education policy and practice, and having you there, Grete, from the research background, and then two really practical examples, and just seeing how the conversation evolved in a very natural way that seemed to be really beneficial to both sides. I think that was fantastic. And the other small thing I really liked was one of the research papers that you talked about that was around stories. That storytelling is quite a powerful learning learning strategy or teaching strategy, because we like stories and children like stories. But there was some really interesting research done that showed that if, I think it was in the context of science teaching, that when there were stories of really successful scientists like Einstein, and you just focus on, their success and what they achieved, then actually that hindered the motivation of students and didn't improve their learning. But if you talk about the challenges that they were faced with, then actually that really helped the motivation of lower performing students, because they didn't just hear about success, but also about the struggles. So an interesting takeaway. Thank you. Should we talk briefly about the first parallel session. Clive, would you like to summarize the key idea from there?
Yes, thanks very much. I think it's very significant that students were at the heart of the discussion today, and people would like to see more discussion in relation to students and personalization and learning styles and learning techniques. We were looking at excuse me, we were looking at vocational and further education versus higher education. And it's interesting when countries are represented at an EU conference that one size doesn't fit all. And that's the key message that came from yesterday's gathering, that we're in a situation where you're looking to try and see if you can match the social and the economic context of particular countries and look at best practices. We had 3 fine presentations yesterday from England, from Austria, and from Norway, looking at different ways of trying to encourage students to have high degrees of completion rates and studying particular curriculum, chiefly maths and the native language as part of a core curriculum, to try and encourage the students to aim higher and to aim for higher standards. The one message that came across very, very strongly is that you don't want a vocational or a further education track to be seen as for losers. But in actual fact, that would be the reality in many, many countries where academia and higher education would be seen as better than vocation. Now, the fact that the Commission and countries and governments and ministries are telling us that there is a severe skills shortage to meet the needs of the employment market means that we have to recognise where we are with the student body, but recognise as well that one size doesn't fit all, and what we need to do is to try and come up with examples that will show best practice and will be relevant in other countries where lessons can be learned. One of the key messages that came seemed to come from Austria, where they had an apprenticeship system and a vocational track. And you're looking at the vocational track, which led to higher grades in qualifications, but lasted a year longer, whereas the apprentices system had 2 grades lower, was only 4 years instead of 5 years, but actually it meant that in the hybrid system that they had in Austria, that students could go on to higher level or further education if they wanted to, depending on how that went. But there was an interesting corollary, because it said that there was a very, very high dropout rate from the VET system. And we want to make sure that in vocational education, as I said earlier, it's not seen as a track for losers. There are relevant curricula, interesting teaching styles and methodologies that are personalized to the needs of the students so that they can grow and develop and go on to further studies if need be, as well as to meaningful employment.
Thank you. Anyone who attended the parallel session yesterday, would you like to add anything? Can we have a microphone there too?
Thank you. Yes, I think that it was a very good summary. Maybe just one additional point that it seemed to me it is quite important that actually the thing with dropping out of the programs, it is really important that people actually complete or go through the whole program, because if you really expect a program to have an impact on person's skills later on in life, then I mean, it's kind of obvious that it's important that he has actually graduated from the program and has been exposed to the curricula. Otherwise, it doesn't kind of make any. It's not logical to assume that the program will have an impact on his or her skills, and this was also probably something that we stressed quite a lot there.
Thank you. And then finally, we had a parallel session about higher education and teachers. Caroline, would you like to summarize briefly what the main ideas or takeaways were for you?
Yes, of course. So from workshop number 3 with the title, The Expectations and Roles of Students and Learners from the New Generations. So we're going back to students, and that is interesting since that was one of the core words in the word cloud and makes me very happy representing the students. During the session yesterday, we got to listen to Eli Leinen, sorry for pronunciation, regarding teachers around society a little bit, and how actually teachers see themselves and having built up the confidence to actually teach and continue developing their skills and methodology to teach during their career, as well as what can actually be done during the time as the teachers are studying to become teachers, to build up this ability to learn how to learn, as well as to develop even more further on to be able to see the pupils or the school students afterwards when they are out and teaching. We got to listen as well to Mr. Volko Bali, Academic Director for Studium Individuale. More of diverse curricula there. It's in higher education, and it can lean towards a little bit of the sort of curricula in liberal arts, and how students are able to choose themselves and build up their education, as well as to get the broader and generic skills throughout their education, and to see the applicability of the skills for a master's program in the future, or to continue on to the labor market. We also got to listen to the moderator, Julie Anderson from the European Commission, talking about a PLA session that was done in Paris earlier in this spring as well, and now about the Commission's new renewed agenda. To summarize in short what was discussed, in my opinion, during this workshop was foremost 3 different areas. The title, as it said, is to what is the way expectations and roles of students and learners from the new generation. What are we actually expecting, as well as what is the teacher expecting? 3 things, mainly. The first one is the modern digital international learning environment that we, the students, are school students as well as students, are expecting and wanting to see and wanting to get. Modern in the way that it's student-centered, but also in modern way of how things are actually produced, as well as how we are interacting. Digital, to be able to interact and use the tools that we have around us. And international, to be able to interact with other contexts as well. Secondly, centered, not only student-centered, but also teacher-centered. And then talking about what I came to in the beginning, supporting the teachers to be able to build up this confidence that they are actually super important for society, as well as they are a ground pillar for making the sustainable development as such. And thirdly, co-creation of meaningful curricula. So the second presentation that we heard, as well as when it comes to teacher education, as well as the teacher in the schools, be able to develop a curricula that is inclusive as well as it is together. So creating personalization for the one that is the learners, but as well as governing procedure where you're actually supervising, not only dictating how it should be. That is in short what I took notes from the session yesterday.
Fantastic. Thank you for a wonderful summary. Would anyone like to add anything, or who was there at the 3rd parallel session yesterday? So we have microphones. No? In that case, I think we will try to move on. I think the conversation, the parallel sessions, I think really raised lots of good questions. But I think we want to really focus the rest of our panel discussion basically on this question, which is on the slide as well. What are the expectations, of teaching and learning, in the future? What do we expect of teachers? And then looking at this from multiple perspectives. We had a brief conversation yesterday, and I think everyone here on the panel, I think they have obviously their own experience, and I think we don't necessarily agree on everything, but I think really one of the ideas is that I think if we want to reimagine teaching and learning, this cannot be decided centrally. I think lots of important people need to be part of thinking what it should look like, and I think many of them are really represented here at this panel. So just a reminder to the audience, feel free to jump in. I will have some questions for our panelists, but equally I want to give you the opportunity to come in with your questions and your comments as well. So when we think about these expectations, maybe we can look at two separate issues. So the first one where I would like us to kick off is about the learning goals and the learning objectives. And then the second one, which we'll get to afterwards, is how we want learning and teaching to happen. So to give you an example, a couple of weeks ago, I had a meeting with the head of education in Daegu, which is I think one of the largest cities in South Korea, and so they came to this meeting basically saying that they have a very strong academic school system, and they think that right now it isn't fit for purpose anymore. So in terms of the objective, what are we really aiming for? They're saying we want to have a much more broader concept of what we're aiming for. So in addition to academic learning, they think what's also important is students' social development, their emotional development, their moral development, and their physical development. So that was their specific aim. And I think the first thing I really want us to think about is, in all the contexts where you work, do you feel that right now we already have a clear understanding of what the aim is? And I don't think we all need to have a shared, obviously in different countries it can be different, but just think about in the context where you work, is there clarity on that? And then afterwards we can talk about whether we can actually implement that. Do teachers have the right skills? What about the curricula? What about assessments? So we'll come to that later. But first of all, let's think about the goals of education. I wonder whether I could start with Ferre and Caroline, with both of you, because I think students were at the heart of our word cloud as well, and I think everyone really appreciates it. I think we need to think about student needs first. So I don't know if one of you would like to kick off with your thoughts about, do you think we already have clarity about the goals and aims of education?
Well, I think what you said earlier about soft skills, moral skills, physical health of the students through education. I think it's always a lot of nice words, and at conferences like these, it sometimes does feel as if we have a common understanding about what education should be like and what should education deliver, which is soft skills, certainly now with artificial intelligence, automation of production and all those things. But then when we are acting as a school student union, a European umbrella organization in the real world, we see that not at all this is the case, and this is not at all where education is going. I think education is still very much focused on delivering workforce, certainly from the impulse from the European Commission and the European Union, I feel, is that it's very much directed towards skills for the labor market, which is very much contradictory to these soft, sustainable skills. And we do have this common sense here that it's not the right thing to do, because these skills are fast changing and the skills forecast is changing constantly. But then in the real world, we as students, we definitely not feel as if this is where we are going.
But so I understand your point. I mean, can I maybe challenge it a little bit? Because at the same time, one of the parallel sessions yesterday, we had a presentation about Generation Initiative, and they're specifically focused on youth unemployment. And the point that we're making is that, right now, I think 75 million young people around the world, they are unemployed. And at the same time, when you ask employers, then they're saying they're not finding the right skills. So I wonder whether there's still something wrong. So you're saying that right now we're just treating young people as future workforce, but right now it doesn't seem that we're actually doing it very well because of unemployment. So maybe we should be more focused on what the labor market needs. Otherwise, young people will be unemployed.
But I think this is the problem, that it's very difficult these days to forecast what the labor market wants and what the labor market needs. So we are trying to, what education is doing right now is trying to deliver workforce, but we're not succeeding because this labor market needs are constantly changing, I think.
We'll hear from Arnold, you in a second. Caroline, do you want to add anything about the learning aims and goals?
Actually, I would. In our opinion, we have a clear aim as a student, like the movement for the students, what we want and why we want to have education, or most particularly higher education, and what we want is how it should be developed. But we do not say that all stakeholders or states or the EU know what the aim is actually, or if it's a clear aim connected to what we actually would like to see or what we want. We often see or hear that education is a human right, even higher education is mentioned to be so sometimes. And it's problematic since it isn't at the moment. Not everybody has access to higher education or education as such, or the ability to be active during the whole program or not to drop out, both for financial reasons, and that is mainly the problem, because we say all these nice words, not with the students, but for most of the stakeholders in the States and the EU. Like, everything is great and we want it to be inclusive, but at the same time, who is supposed to be paying, as well as who has the ability to participate fully during the education, has the background to be able to contribute in the classroom, and the social capital to be able to be respected. That is questions that we want to have answered, and as well as to reflect upon how it's supposed to be financed. Tuition fees creates a problem for people to come in, as well as it creates problems for people that has disadvantaged backgrounds as well too, if you drop out, to come back again, if you have to pay. It's also a problem then to maybe go back to studies afterwards in life, if you have a maternity leave, or if you decide to go work and then come back. And it creates problems for the lifelong learning and the continuous development for the individuals, as well as it creates problems for society. So that is the greatest problem, I would say, that it's many nice words, but then how it's supposed to be financed and how it's supposed to be realized, that is where it's lacking.
So it would be great to hear, I think, also from the teacher's perspective or school leaders, and then we'll come to the employer's perspective in a second as well. I don't know if either Joke or Clive or Agnes, if you would like to add your ideas about, do we have clarity about the goals in terms of what we want young people to learn?
I think from my perspective, there is an enormous gap, what is said already earlier, between the nice words, the ideas where, to be very honest and very negative, we are talking about not only today and not only a year ago, but in fact almost as long as I'm in education, and that's almost half a century. What I see the problem is that we talk about it, but we have done far too little to implement it into the world of education. And I think there are several issues which are important. In the first place, I think that the preparation, and I especially here talk about history educators, because that is my very specific field of experience, is very little. I mean, we talk about a lot of things in history, and of course now, the latest 20 years, there is more about also pedagogy and didactical approaches, but still there is not a sort of integrated approach. And then many of the teachers who are there for years and years, they have had far too little opportunity to do lifelong learning. And I found it very interesting that yesterday also in group 3, this was mentioned for higher education as well. We have taken for far too long that people who finish their education in education, they're ready to go. And that is, of course, as we heard, the life is changing and is more and more changing, so people have constantly to adapt. I think part of the story is, and that was mentioned also in one of the groups I saw, that there is very little dialogue. There is an enormous confusion about concepts we are using. If I only use the word competencies, I mean, some people have an idea and many people say there's competencies and there's skills and whatever. Now, if you want to help people to understand these sort of things, this was also one of the issues. The other important things, I think, and therefore also, it's all about students. You want, as a teacher, to prepare your students as well. But you are an expert and you have learned, etc. And in the preparation of teachers, there was a lack of equality. You know, the experts come in, they talk you who you are. And also in group 3, it was teachers are resources too. So we have had, if there was peer learning, then it was quite often people from the academic world telling the others what to do, and what teachers did was defensive and not opening themselves. So for me, I think these are the very important things, and there is for history education, and it's not mentioned, and it also didn't come up in this whole word cloud, that is that for us, the European cooperation and internationalization is really extremely important. What we saw in the last 20 years, 15 years, that we have gone in history education in so many countries more and more to a narrow national perspective. And what we see is that our students live in a global village, and the classroom is a reflection of that global village at the moment. And so for me, there is another point I would really very much like to stress, that we have to go beyond the borders and that we need to work together in Europe for that. Mm-hmm. And I agree, we need political will for that, and we need a lot of money for that.
I think you're making, I mean, many of you were basically saying that you know, it's one thing to just you know, talk about the lofty learning aims, but I think we really need to focus on like implementation. How can we actually make it happen? Yeah. So and then beyond that also, how can we, even if we have, you know, teachers who are well prepared, you know, your point about also student access, like do they actually have access to that sort of education as well? But I don't want us to move on, because I do think there are some like genuine debates about the aims as well, which maybe we haven't been able to tease out yet. I mean, on the one hand, we've heard, you know, that some of these soft skills are really important. I want to hear, Arnold, from you. So, from the perspective of employers, do you think right now we have clarity about the sort of things we should be aiming for, and what's your view on this?
Well, thank you. I think we have partly clarity, but not completely, and that's one of the main challenges at the moment, I think, for employers, for teachers, for everyone involved. I think part of the story is that we should move beyond this dichotomy, I would say, this distinction we keep making between the need for soft skills, the need for a student-centered approach, versus what is needed for the labor market. I think that's one of the main messages here, that I think that's one of the main modern approaches as well, that we forget about that, because they are completely intertwined from my perspective. We need skills to equip students and children with skills that are relevant for their life and for the labor market. And I think that, for instance, soft skills, they are essential also for the labor market. It's not just for your personal development. And actually, personal development is, at the same time, very relevant for any job you want to get in the future. So that as a first notion. I think from the employer's perspective, what is very relevant is that we see it as a two-sided coin. So on the one hand, we need to modernize, and we've heard many interesting stories yesterday and this morning already about how we should do that. The employer's perspective teaches that we need new skills, of course. There are many technological developments going on in society that we need to respond to. Employers need IT skills. Employers need green skills as well to respond to challenges of climate change and so on. To facilitate energy transition. Employers also need very much new transversal skills, such as soft skills. Those were mentioned a lot already. Those transversal skills, I would also not forget about entrepreneurial skills, in the broadest sense of the word, I would say. It's not just about starting a business very concretely, to start a pastry shop, which is also great, by the way, or to become a bodybuilder or train people about that. It's very relevant, but it's about much more than that. And it's not just about the concrete skills to learn how to start a business. It's also to create an entrepreneurial mindset, to be able to do whatever you want to do in life. So that, on the one hand, those changes are needed on the labor market, and we need to find ways to respond to that. One essential way to do that is also to find new ways to identify the skills needs. Because, as said, we only know partly what is needed. And because changes are happening so fast, we need also to identify better, and not just at a national or international policy level, but also on the local level, in cooperation with local businesses, the public employment services, and the local schools. We need to identify what is needed on this local labor market, because that is still relevant. And that's the point I wanted to make as well. On the one hand, we need to respond to changes, and we've heard great examples of that. But at the same time, we should not forget about traditional learning. Basic skills, for instance, is still a major challenge. We've heard that the results are quite dramatic, actually, still in Europe when it comes to numeracy and literacy skills. And these skills are essential if you also want to move to those new skills that we think we need. When it's about critical thinking, you're not able to learn to be able to think critically if you're not first able to actually read and write and then understand, and then are able to compare different stories, for instance, to see which one is more true than the other. So we need to focus still on those basic skills, and that's also for employers, especially in small businesses, essential, because when people are not able to measure, for instance, basic amounts of dough that they need to bake a bread, then we are far from having functioning labor markets.
I think you make a really important point about the basic literacy and numeracy still being a challenge. I think, when you look at the latest PISA data across many countries, I think in the OECD, if I'm not mistaken, it's roughly 1 in 5 students who are 15 years old who do not meet the basic levels of literacy and numeracy, and also in science as well. So that is very significant, because in reading, what it means is that you are unable to read and basically interpret like a fairly basic article in the newspaper, or even like the job contract that you're given. So 1 in 5, that's a very high percentage. I wonder, what you were also picking up is the importance of these traditional skills. Some educators, I think, would say that actually this is still what we should focus on. I think some people would say, that there has been a shift away from knowledge too much on soft skills, and this can be taught in a way that actually reduces academic achievement if you just teach, for example, problem solving, critical thinking as a generic skill. So I don't know if anyone agrees with that view or would like to. I don't know, Clive, what's your view on that?
Well, I'm interested in the discussion. Because I think what's needed is national consensus as to what's the best way forward. Because it seems that the balance between educating for economy and educating for society is shifting, right? And we need to be aware of the social contexts in which we are working. And that groups like this, where we have practitioners and researchers and officials from the ministries that are decision makers and key planners and policy drivers, the dilemma is that their political masters are much, much more short-term in terms of their views. And what we need to do in terms of investment in education is look at 10 years and much, much longer down the road, so that we can see where things go. You have to set the seed, you have to let it go, you have to try, make mistakes a little bit, and so on. And the needs of the employers, like there was an interesting thing that came to mind when we were discussing earlier about vocational training and so on. There's an initiative that's going now for 3 years in Ireland, designed to look out for students who are not motivated by secondary education, and to try and give them opportunities in post-secondary schooling, right? It's not only directed, say, at 16, 17, but it's called College Awareness Week. And it's a collaboration between all of the higher educational institutions, the institutes of technology, post-leaving certs, the parents' councils, the students' councils, the institutes of guidance, school leaders, and so on. And they meet, and in 1 week, they try and create a national discussion amongst parents at home in disadvantaged families that there are different ways of doing things. But the key point of it is to deal with the students, whether it's the second level students or the university students from the locality, and get them to go back to their schools and say, this is how I got to be where I am. Or in schools where the teachers would say, well, this was the course that I did, but it would be telescoped into a week. And like that conversation is so, so vital. And it's what we're trying to do in a pan-European context, but it's just so difficult to do it, because the secret of a successful education system is to have happy children who are well adjusted and who can cope and see a future for themselves in an era of lifelong learning, as my colleague was saying. So from the very, very beginning, that idea of scoping what's best to meet the needs of the 20% that are square pegs in round holes. We have to tackle that. And it's very, very difficult because of the different contexts in the various countries.
Thank you. Agnes, I'm also wondering, do you think that currently teachers that you represent and other educators, are they involved enough in these conversations about the objective of education? You know, I think one of the someone shared with me yesterday, just thinking about our audience, you know, we talk about education policy and how that should impact learning and teaching, but I mean, how many teachers do we have in the audience, or how many teachers did we have yesterday? Obviously, they were probably in school teaching, so it was difficult for them to be here, but I mean, were there any? So do you feel that the voice of teachers is adequately represented in these conversations?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Actually, just a clarification. I'm representing here now the workers' unions and the teacher unions. So from the workers' unions perspective, of course, our focus is the future workers and the workers of today. And I came to this conference with great expectations. The expectations were like, okay, the future workers, the students of today, and the workers of today, what kind of challenges they face and how to help them with these challenges. And the problem is that when we are talking about education science, it's very nice, but they focus on the education from the perspective of a continuous, uninterrupted development. But we have to see the context, and the context came out from my colleagues from the panel. The context is what kind of political, economic, and social situation we are in. And it has been interrupted because of the crisis. And now we still face, according to Eurostat data from May, 19 million people are still unemployed in the EU, and 4 million young unemployed people under age of 25. So the question is, I expected here some peer learning, some discussions among practitioners and also the actors of education systems and schools on how to support upskilling. Because indeed, mismatch on skills of education and expectation of the labor market is an important problem, but it's not the prior problem. The first important problem is to provide and create quality jobs. The second one is about supporting upskilling. And the third one is about kind of blaming the education sector to better prepare people for the future work. But as the labor market is all the time changing, we have to provide transparent skills and competencies, as the colleagues mentioned. Concerning teachers, I saw from the bubbles that the students' world were this big, which is very good, and the teachers are this small. The problem is that teachers need to be motivated. The teachers have a very important role, and it's not only from the teachers' training perspective, but let's see what they are facing. Lots of refugee children came. What kind of support they got? What kind of extra support they got from training perspective, from upskilling? There was a very important Commission communication came up in May on schools development, and it highlighted that there are problems on recruitment and retention of teachers. The teacher profession is aging. They make a link between attractiveness of the teaching profession and pay and status and continuous professional development. So how can we help teachers more also from this perspective? It is my open question.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear, you know, what sort of thoughts are really top of mind for all of you, because, you know, and I sort of completely understand the tendency to start. I mean, we need to think about the really practical implication. We just can't just talk about like goals. We need to think about how does it actually work. This is right, but equally, I think for education systems, I think to work well, I think the goals need to be really clear, and all of the implementation, so all of the teacher support, curriculum, assessment, all of that needs to be aligned with that. So we'll move on to the second part in a second. I wonder whether someone from the audience would like to come in. I think one of the questions, I don't know whether you might have a completely different question, but one of the things I'm thinking, are there any particular examples of, you know, successful processes in your countries where, there is really good dialogue and collaboration where the goals are really agreed by many stakeholders. I don't know. Would anyone like to come in? See if it's working. Well, can you try speaking to the microphone if it works?
No, it's not working.
I think it is
yes?
working. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Good morning.
Do you want to say your name and
Thank
organization?
Thank you very much. Pedro Abrantes from the Ministry of Education of Portugal. I think that, well, being realistic, the education goals will be always on discussion, and this because the education is a key for our lives, for our economies, for our societies. And I think that our best will is that this discussion is really democratic and participatory. And I would like to give an example. Our government is during the last year and is currently developing a process. Besides the formal and traditional process to listen the labor market and the teachers, we are improving also the process of hearing the students, and I think this is also a major message from this conference that we really appreciate. That I think all countries are aware of this issue, and our program, in very broad terms, included on one side to listen the students' voice over the curriculum and the education goals. This is through a lot of assemblies in schools and one national assembly with the students that were elected by colleagues and were discussing over a day with the ministries and Secretary of State and other policy experts. And on the other side, we have a budget on each school that is used only through a democratic participation of students. Students make proposals, discuss them, vote them, and at the end, the measures they decided are funded by the state budget. And I think this is some improvements on the way that students participate on the decisions and feels they belong to the education system and to the society at large.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds like a great example. I wonder whether there's anyone here from Estonia who would like to comment on our lifelong learning strategy and how, the process of how that was formulated. I think it was quite the participatory process with discussions with lots of educators. I don't know how many students, but is there anyone who would like to comment on that? Or? No? If not, okay. Well, there's I don't know if you have a separate question to these or comment.
I'm not from Estonia.
Okay.
Caroline Geeslings from Belgium, Flemish Government Department of Education and Training. I have a comment in the sense that it is, in my view, indeed very important to have a general discussion and agreement on the aims of education. But then, if that is reached, it in general is reached on a top level. And it is on the ground, in the classrooms, that it has to be done. And we have a support measure for teachers where they can get extra support from colleague teachers, fellow teachers, to help them to be able to give education to students with learning problems and other kinds of problems. And we found from the analysis of the implementation of this support measure that it is extremely it is extremely important to get enough time and to get enough conversation and dialogue in the classroom, on the field, in concrete situations about what are the aims, what are we trying to realize, and then to co-create according to the knowledge that both sides have already, the teacher and the supporting one, to co-create knowledge of how to do it. So it's not only on top level that things need to be solved and discussed, but it is also very, very important to have it in the classroom and the work floor. And that also is something that really needs to be supported by governments, I would say.
Thank you. Can we have just a quick comment from me as well? If you can say your name and organization as well.
Julian Stanley, European Training Foundation.
Thank you.
I'd just like to echo what a number of people have been saying on this issue about the importance of aims and the overall goals of education. I think, you know, what people seem to be saying is that, yeah, it is important that there are broad goals, that there are shared goals within which all parties and stakeholders can work, but we need to be cautious about over-prescription and about taking away freedom to negotiate at lower levels and to set goals at school level or at regional level or with local businesses and so on. I mean, sure, there are economic goals, there are social goals, there are personal goals from education and training, and they will always be in the mix. But perhaps there's been a bit of a temptation to build those in, particularly at national level, and to say, okay, we have to set national curriculum which employers agree to, or we have to include social elements in education which all the social parties are signed up to. And then that has resulted sometimes, despite the wishes of people, in an over-prescriptive and inflexible, overloaded curriculum which has prevented teachers and students and managers actually creating responsive education which serves local communities and which serves students. So perhaps we're now on a step where we're backing off a little bit from over-prescription of goals and trying to create some space in order to really meet people's needs.
Yeah, I think you're making a very important point, and my understanding is that, you know, the curricula in different European countries, there are different kinds of challenges. I think in some places the curricula are overloaded, as you say. I think in other places, even when you read the national curriculum, it's quite brief, but then there could be a different challenge, which basically is exams. There's so much pressure in some countries for teachers to constantly improve exam results that even when the national curriculum isn't, you know, so detailed, that's really what's the big driver of everything that's happening in schools and education. I would like us to move on to the next stage of the conversation, because I think everyone is itching to talk about the implementation challenges. I mean, maybe we can start with a very simple question. Let's take the learning to learn. So motivation to learn and having the skills to learn. You know, this was one of the points made by Professor Simons yesterday, and I think, you know, all of us, even if we have slightly different views about the learning aims, I think that's a shared idea that I think everyone would sign up to. You know, we want young people to continue to learn because the world's going to change and the labor market's going to change. I mean, this is not a new idea. So I wonder, why haven't we made more progress? Like, what do we need to actually do differently to make sure that children and young people, they learn to learn? So hopefully that'll uncover some of the implementation challenges. I don't know, Jokke, would you like to start on that one?
Yeah, I think the problem is that why haven't we done enough about it? I think because we say we have to do it, but we have too little tools developed where you can really exercise that sort of ideas. most teachers will have idea how they deal with the memorization and with writing essays and whatever, but they have had very few tools to actually exercise that. And what you then see is that also then there is research, and they say, oh, but the methods they apply, they are not working at all. So I think one of the very big reasons is that we talk about it. I remember that I started and learning to learn. That was really the key word when we started our studies. But in fact, what did they do to make that happen, and so on. So one of the things we tried, and I'm not saying that we succeeded, but we tried at least to develop those sort of tools to give our colleagues hands to say, okay, if you work with this sort of ideas, then probably these things might work and you might have better results. But still, it's trial and error, because there is not that much available. There's a lot of talking about it, but the actual practical issues to do that is much more difficult.
So can I just clarify? I mean, I have a lot of respect for experienced colleagues. So when you say when we started our studies about learning, so when was it?
What do you mean? When I?
Yes.
You want my date? It was. I mean, it was the word they were using in the university at 67.
Okay, so I think it's an important. And I mean, we had a great conversation yesterday, and I think this is a reality check, right?
Yeah.
So if this was the key discussion point in 1967,
yeah,
and today we're in 2017,
50 years.
50 years.
It's 50 years.
So I think rather than just talking about the aims, we need to like really clearly understand what's wrong. Like, why have we not made more progress? I know there's a couple of people that want to come in as well. We'll come to the audience in just 1 second. I want to also hear again from the student perspectives. Do you feel that the way schools are currently organized? I mean, does it? We saw yesterday about how different teaching practices are used, and in most classrooms, it is very much teacher-directed. So most of the meaningful choice about what's happening, these are choices that are made by the teacher, not the student. Do you think in this sort of environment, do you feel that students will develop the motivation to learn and the skill to learn? What do you both think?
Well, one of the problems is the debate is often about students and learning, that we are approaching students and learning more and more, and that is also what we are measuring in the quality assurance system now with the new ESGs, at least, even more. But the problem is still the diversity of the students in the classroom, to be able to develop different perspectives during the time in learning from other students and other backgrounds. That is one of the issues. Secondly, we're discussing students and learning just as a learning part, like the lectures and so on, how we are supposed to do them and give them in the seminars. But one thing that I realized, and I often hear is that the method of how to examine the students has not really developed, how to change. Yeah. It's still like the surface learning when it comes to for the students to learn for the exam, rather than learn how to actually use the knowledge that they gained through the education to then continue on life, through the life, to build up on that knowledge that's gained, to continue on learning, both outside in society, as well as the ability to go back to higher education or to education as such. And the problem is so 3 things that should maybe be changed a little bit to be able to have this actually happening is, first of all, and look at students and learning and look at the ways of examining the students. We're actually looking at students' ability to then use the knowledge to continue on developing, both in the situation of the labor market as well as for the private use of the knowledge. Secondly, are we actually investing in our teachers, then the higher education teachers, to be able to develop the methodology to teach with student-centered learning and to use different kind of methods? As well, in the case of many countries, the teachers are struggling between research and teaching and hours to develop the pedagogical methods for the students to be able to participate more. And that is the issue itself, to be able to reach more of the student-centered learning, giving the students ability to learn how to learn a lifelong way. And then we have the question about the ability to learn. and to come back. That is also something that needs to be looked at. As I said in the beginning, it comes to both the flexible curricula as well as the access, that it should not be a hinder to come back afterwards.
Well, about this learning to learn, I think, to be honest, there have been, since 50 years, a lot of efforts to integrate this learning to learn in education, which I think that in the end, it very much depends on flexibility of students and like the creativity of students. And the problem with these learning to learn efforts in education today and in the past is that we try to box it into education as we know it today, which is taking place from 9 to 5 in 50-minute classes, subject-oriented, and I just don't think it works in this framework. And what I think is needed is that I once heard someone say that, giving this critique on education, that education is, as a sector in society, is one of the most traditional sectors, one of the least innovative sectors in society. Why, on the other hand, society expects from education to be the most innovative one, because it's the one that raises the people of the future, the people of the society of tomorrow. But then on the other hand, it's one of the most traditional sectors because it goes very slow. Changes come from above, from national level. And I think what we have to do and what institutions as the European Union and national ministries of education have to do is to be courageous enough to put the shaping of education in the hands of students and their teachers in co-creation, because they're not only the workers of tomorrow, but they're also the people to decide what skills are needed tomorrow and what kind of people will be needed in the society of tomorrow. So I think there is only one team, one dream team, to create the education that will help us to provide not only workforce, but people, citizens of tomorrow. And it's the teachers and the students, but they're not given the opportunity because we're still too much centered on these boxes from 9 to 5 courses, classes, subject-orientated. Because I think we are also a bit afraid that if we don't, if we're not going to teach students how to do French grammar by writing it on the blackboard and saying it out loud 5 times to memorize it, that they won't be able to speak French. And I think this is the big problem in education.
I don't think, though, that our students in second level are willing to take on that responsibility that you were suggesting. I think in many, many instances, the dilemma is that the students, although, you know, most kids are happy in school for the most part, right? And there was a comment yesterday from one of our keynotes about, you know, for deeper learning, we need better assessments. I'm not sure of that, is the short answer. I think we need different assessments and different models of assessment. But the biggest bastion against change is the antagonism of the parents to change, because they're quite happy with the status quo, which meets the needs of the majority of the students. And until we can motivate the teachers and the students to undertake curricula that the students want to learn and that the teachers are invigorated and enjoy teaching, I think we will struggle with 50-year debates about, you know, how things will change in the fullness of time. But your proposal is very radical, but I don't think that the students are ready to take on that responsibility. I think they're far too compliant, for the most part, in the classroom. And that type of articulateness, you know, that you've verbalized and your colleague from the university students has also verbalized, I think most of the kids in schools are happy for education to be done to them rather than to participate.
Let's take quick comments from Joke and Agnes, and then I know there's a couple of people who want to come in as well.
Yeah, I also think that there is the society in this respect that is very distrustful for the sort of responsibility bringing to the people who are working with it. If there is in the Netherlands a proposal now for how we would teach 2032, and if you saw how the public opinion, how politicians reacted, it's immediately a no. So I would say it's further. I mean, yes, we think education should be innovative, it should be high quality, but then for many people who are loud, they have very different ideas than what we are discussing here about the innovative approaches.
Yeah, I would like to focus on the learning to learn. It is on?
Yeah.
From two perspectives. One of is what you all said, that yes, how to support the students. And I don't think that the colleagues from Augustus' idea is such radical, because when I was a teacher, I always, yeah, it's on. So I always try to teach the students. It is an attitude. Learning to learn is one of the key competencies, but this is the most difficult to teach. And it is an attitude. I always told them, you have a diploma in your hand, but learning is not over. You have to learn when you are going to travels. You are going to learn by discussion of people. So it's an ongoing development. And it's very important because the labor market is changing all the time. And you have to be ready to change yourself. From practical perspective, of course, when we say testing and examination, it will not help in the learning to learn. It should be more flexible curriculum, as ETF colleague came up with, and it's very important that to involve a lot of project-based learning. But concerning why the learning to learn after 50 years is still not further developed, one of the examples is the PIAC survey. One of the interesting results was of the PIAC survey that those people would like to participate in lifelong learning courses who are highly skilled. However, 1 out of 4 adults had very, very low literacy, numeracy, and digital skills achievement in the PIAC survey in Europe. So there is lots of problem to support the adults of the present, the workers, low-skilled workers, on lifelong learning. And they work hard from 9 to 5 or even 3 shifts. So how to support them for upskilling by investment, and also how to support them in the working hours, and how to provide them individual learning. These are all challenges.
And especially, you know, what Kai was saying before, I mean, if these adults have had a really terrible experience in school, they're motivated, I mean, do they want to go for other like learning courses after work if their previous experience with learning has not been positive for whatever reason? I want to give an opportunity for a couple of people to come in. Yes, please. Say your name and organization, please.
Hey, everybody. My name is Mart. I'm coming from Dream Apply, which is a company that is developing software for universities. And I'm very thankful for the Ministry of Education for inviting a few companies here as well, because actually I think that if you want to do innovation faster, then one of the big issues, what I have been thinking about lately a lot is that I'm also representing an organization which is called Baltic Nordic EdTech Founders Forum, which is basically a club of small companies. Basically, you need to be a little bit crazy to start a company in education technology, because you need to believe that you can change the world into a little bit better place. And knowing that universities and schools and ministries are very, very bad at buying innovation. And at the same time, universities and schools and ministries are very bad at making innovation itself. I mean, don't be offended or anything, but this is the reality. And I hope you all agree with me. So I had a meeting 2 weeks ago with 16 top management level people from Netherlands universities, and I brought up this discussion to them as well, and they totally agreed that there is a great divide today. So there are really cool people working their asses off literally on a daily basis to try to make something good for the schools and universities and ministries, and that at the same time they have really big difficulties to bring these ideas, what they have, and the tools that they have to the schools, to the kids, actually. And I would really like to get you to think about how could we change this? I mean, how could we create an ecosystem into education sector which would foster the innovation, which is also happening outside of ministries and schools. Because I think if we combine together the crazy people that believe that they can actually do something to help, and the people that are actually doing it on a daily basis, working very hard to teach the students in schools. I mean, I know how hard it is. My son is high ADHD, and he's a little bit autistic as well. So it is crazy hard. I'm just going back home tomorrow to meet with the teachers because, again, problems in schools, in the school, and I'm looking at how he's learning, and it's totally different from what we use today, what kind of methodologies we use today in school. And I believe that if we could get innovative people and companies into the schools, well, to think about, okay, what kind of methodology we actually need to do to get this kind of people, this kind of kids motivated, so they would really want to learn. And I know that it's possible because I'm working with him on a daily basis at home. He's very motivated to learn. Yeah, thanks. But we just need to have this ecosystem so the people who have the ideas, they could actually bring them to the society. Thanks.
Thank you. Can we have another comment or question from there, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Jens Christiansen. I'm not from Estonia. I'm Danish, but living here for 20 years. I represent Loquis, also technology. I've been working with change management for the last 25 years, and I can say Estonia is an interesting place to be. There's a lot of changes here. Compared to Denmark, when I was going to Denmark every time, I think it's so slowly happening in Denmark comparing to Estonia. So we can have so much to learn, actually, from Estonia. But about the learning process, I think we should not only look 50 or 100 years back. We could actually take advice from a guy who was killed for saying something wise. I hope you will not kill me for it. Socrates, he told, instead of wasting time teaching people, we should rather helping them to learn. And actually, this is what we know. We all know this is the right way, but we keep on teaching.
What do you think that means?
It means we should actually rather focus on the responsibility of those who need to learn, asking questions. So they will actually take responsibility as fast as possible, not waiting to the 9th grade. No, they need to. I mean, it doesn't help to teach our children. They don't listen. If I try to teach adult people in companies, they will say, you're out of business. You need to ask questions and then give advice when they are requested for it. Don't waste time telling what people should do.
I guess that is the art and science of teaching as well. It's not just talking or lecturing. It's basically what you described.
And then the next question is actually not only for the panel but for all of us. I think the main question is about. I think we all know what we should do or could do and a lot of ideas. But what are you going to do tomorrow differently in your mindset? What is the shift of mindset of my mindset? Not of yours. Mine. What am I going to do differently? That's my question to you. I'd like to hear the answers from the people in the panel. Each of you, what are you going to do differently tomorrow compared to today, based on the learning we did in these 2 days?
Thank you. Let's have one other quick comment from the back. If you can keep your question or comment brief, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Matis, representing AISHE, the European Student Forum, and I just wanted to make a quick point regarding what the representative of the school leadership said about students not being ready for this responsibility, or being content that education is something that is done to them rather than something they participate in. I think probably this is true at the moment, but the reason why it's true, or why a lot of students are maybe content with this, is because that's all they know. And of course, if you go to them with this proposal, like in the classroom, and for 9 years or 10 years or 12 years, they've been in an education system where education is something done to them, and now this teacher who maybe they know for years and who has taught them in the style that the teacher is in front of class having a monologue, and now suddenly one day out of the blue says, "Okay, let's have a dialogue." Of course, it's a surprise, and students, much like teachers, much like the education system, much like society, they're also afraid to change. But this isn't actually justification to leave this dialogue aside. The fact that it's hard. Most things that are worth doing are hard and take time. But you have to start somewhere. Otherwise, you won't get anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. We are coming to the end of our panel discussion. I think students and student learning and development is obviously, that's the heart of education. But equally, teachers, I think, are the key people that are shaping the learning environments. So in terms of final remarks, I'm just wondering whether, I'm not sure we'll be able to hear from everyone, but if some of you would like to share your ideas about what do we need to do differently so that teachers were in a better position to create learning environments that are effective. Agnes, would you like to start?
Yes, just very briefly. Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. I would like to put the importance of governance. We see that teachers and teacher trade unions, many times they don't have the say on reforms. And reforms not only focus on the students and have an impact, a huge impact on the students, but the teachers have to have an involvement on the implementation, exactly what one of the colleagues said. So I would like to have a focus on effective social dialogue, involvement of the teacher trade unions in decision making, and involvement of the workers' unions when there are any decisions on vocational education and new curricular development, because you have to know where the profession is changing from and where to go for. Thank you.
Arno,
yes, thank you. Well, I'm not, as employer's representative, I'm not going to interfere with what happens inside the schools, of course. The only thing I want to offer is the approach. It was touched upon briefly, but not enough, I think, during this conference, perhaps, is the practical dimension and the opportunities which it gives when learning takes place in different contexts. It was mentioned also by students' representatives to think outside the box a bit regarding context of learning and learning hours even. But I would also point to learning in the company. And we all know, of course, about vocational training, work-based learning and apprenticeships. But I have the impression it's still underestimated what the benefits of it and how much it can add. And I want to add there that small companies, for instance, they are actually also main training providers. When people are going to a company to receive part of their curriculum, they're actually confronted with practical problems. That's where they learn. They learn to contextualize, to think critically and to be creative. Exactly those key skills that we think students should learn in the near future. So this is very important, and we need, for that to happen, we need that companies at local level, at national level, and schools are working together so that this cooperation takes place more and more, and meaning that, well, in the governance structure and the policy structures are adapted, that education training reforms are happening, so that students can actually get the skills that they need.
Thank you.
I think we need to reinforce the value and the status of teachers in our community. I think that is just so important. They are a vital cog in the wheel of our society. But also in terms of continuous professional development and continuous professional dialogue, we need to set in place structures that require teachers to upskill every number of years so that they can not just qualify and then do the same thing for the next 35 years, but that every couple of years they're doing something that inspires them and motivates them to do things differently.
I agree, but I would say not every couple of years, but in fact that it should be embedded in the yearly aspect of learning. Lifelong learning is really vital, but I would also say that there was another word what was used in it. It was personalized. And what we see then now, often if there is lifelong learning, it's a national issue about anti-racism, anti-what. And I would argue that's very important, and I'm not against it, but also give the teachers the opportunity, the autonomy to formulate their personalized needs, what they need, they feel they need for themselves and for students they were working with. So I would also use this word personalized, which came as an important thing to accept the autonomy, the knowledge, the expertise of a teacher also themselves to argue, okay, this is really what I need to improve my professional performance.
Well, I would say involvement of students not only when it comes to co-creation of curricula, but also in the governance of the institutions. Not only once a year, it's great, or giving a separate budget for the students, but actually hear the students' voices throughout every single decision that is taken and taking them seriously. That is one part, as well as then we can proceed with the developments. So the teachers are super important as well as the students, because we are the ones that are actually then in the room that is supposed to learn and to be taught by someone else. Then to be able to be taught, investment in both the teachers' further development in the pedagogical skills as well as within the learning environment, to have a good learning environment. And the last one, a greater support system for the students, enabling students to fully participate in higher education instead of having to worry about the finances and the housing situation, so that we can only be students and truly invest our time in that. And then if we want to work aside to gain experience, but for most, be able to be students.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think as a last comment that I think we as civil society stakeholders, we know pretty much where we want to go with this. So I want to challenge institutions, policymakers here present, but also throughout the European Union to get in touch with us and work together with us to make it happen. And not only institutions, but also on very local level in the classroom, want to challenge teachers and schools to be courageous enough to take up the ideas of students, because maybe on the first hand they will not be interested and they are content as it is, but I think it's about proper support and trusting them in their capacities, and then they for sure can make a great change.
Thank you. Just very quick final thought from me. I think the reality check that similar conversations were had 50 years ago, I think that's something that I'm really taking away from this conversation. What it means for each of us, I mean, obviously, we all work in different contexts, so we need to think about what we need to do differently. But I think it's something very important. With that, if you can all join me in thanking everyone on the panel.
Thank you for...
Thanks very much. Now we'll watch a very quick video about an inspiring Estonian and how skills and competencies have shaped their world.
Kun mä tulin yksi 14-aastane põgenik, siis ma sain aru, et ma pean iseenese järgi vaatama. Ma tundsin, et ma saan hakkama, ja siis oli veel üks väga tähtis asi. Ma tundsin ennast vabana, et mitte keegi ei määra minu üle. Ja see on mulle praegu ka peaaegu kõige tähtsamatest asjadest. See on ainult mina, kes määrab enese üle. Minu tädi Valentin, tema tundis neid, kelles kool oli skolan för bok- och reklamkonst. Ja ta läks nende juurde ja küsis, et kas ma tohin tulla sinna kui kuidas öeldakse, eriõpilane, nad võtsid mind vastu. Ja see oli üks väga tähtis aeg minu elus, et ma käisin kunstikoolis ja ma olin täitsa õnnelik. Täitsa õnnelik. Ma võisin joonistada. Üks kunstikooli kaaslastest, tema töötas seal kirjastuses, kus Astrid Lindgren töötas. Sellepärast julgesin minna sinna kirjastusse, kus Astrid oli, et minu see sõber seal töötas. Ja siis ma näitasin talle oma joonistusi ja siis küsin, et kas saate mulle anda midagi joonistada. Nii et mina sain joonistada selle Miia Miu proovijoonistused. Ja talle meeldisid, Astrid ütles, saad terve raamatu. Ja õnnelikuna koju ja joonistasin ja tagasi. Ja pärast seda ma ei ole ilma tööta olnud.
I thought it was such an inspiring story. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Margus Pedaste. He's a professor of educational technology at the University of Tartu, and your presentation will be about the conceptual model for designing learning and teaching for the future. So taking a comprehensive systemic look about how the different bits fit together. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome everybody. It's a great honor to be here, and actually I thought that maybe I would skip my presentation because I made notes yesterday and today, and I found that all the important words have been already said. So that Robert Jan Simon started with introducing the importance of learning skills, so that we all know that the learning skills are one of the most important skills to learn, because if we have them, then we don't have to bother about different types of other learning goals. Because if we have the learning skills, then we can always learn something new. So then it was mentioned in some discussion from the audience that self-directedness is something important. So again, if we are self-directed in the learning process, then we don't need much more. Actually, we just have to be able to define the main learning goals as self-directedness expects from us. And after that, we have to be able to select the most appropriate learning methods and to monitor how we are doing in learning process. And finally, if we have achieved the learning outcomes. So that all is there. Then a bit later, Professor Everkikas also mentioned the importance of subjective well-being. Again, if we can set one of the most important goals in school or in everyday life, that we really have the well-being, so that we at least subjectively feel that we are doing well, then we are motivated to learn. We are motivated to self-directed approach, actually, so that it's all said. So therefore, I thought that maybe there is not much I can add to that. From the third parallel session where I participated yesterday, I got one more very important idea for myself, which was collaboration. So that we are not talking only about individual learning goals, but shared learning goals. We are not talking about individual approaches to learn, but also how can we benefit from learning together, and not only how we can benefit, but only how we can support others. So that it brings me to some questions from you, actually, so that maybe you can raise your hand if you have learned something during the last week. Is there anybody who have really learned something during the last week? So I see some 86.4% or so, as we usually do it. So the second question would be, how many of you have been the chance to facilitate somebody's learning? so that you have taught somebody during the last week? Okay, about 50%. That's also not bad, quite good. I have to be supportive, as you know, because you have to feel yourself very well. That's important message we got from yesterday. But now I would ask you to answer the final question from me right now. How many of you have somehow conceptualized your learning or teaching process during the last week? How many of you have thought about the way you are teaching or you are learning? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15%. Yeah, that's it. Okay, that was also our question when we started to think about lifelong learning strategy that was mentioned earlier in the discussion by Arthur Diver, and nobody told us what it is actually and how it was developed. I also didn't tell you because I wasn't involved in this process, but I'm very happy about this, that we have that kind of document in Estonia. But we found in operationalizing this lifelong learning strategy in the context of teacher education and university studies that there are a bit too many words. Again, yesterday we saw that there are quite many words we are using in describing what is innovative learning, what are the learning goals today, and so on. And what is good in this lifelong learning strategy is that there are only 5 general strategic aims set for Estonian learners. Let's say that these are all people living in Estonia, because there is really mentioned that the learners are not only the ones involved in formal education, but the ones in lifelong learning process. One of those 5 strategic aims is very different from the other ones, because I see that the one that is really focusing on the learning approach is the main strategic aim, but the other ones are more like supporting the main aim. But then this one very generally mentioned aim in this document has been operationalized in this lifelong learning strategy as well. And there have been used about 50 different words, terms, to describe what it is. There are mentioned all those generic skills, key competencies, 21st century skills. Also those a bit competing concepts have been described there. And we found that it's impossible to focus on so many things, and therefore we need a better framework where we can focus on something that is really measurable. As it was also mentioned yesterday in one of the discussions, that we really have to know that that we make some progress. But in order to see that, we need some evaluation instruments, and we have to define what it is, what is actually our more specific goal. This brings me to the topic I'm discussing. I really would like to discuss with you, but unfortunately the time limit is not very much supporting that kind of discussion. And also the setup of the conference room is rather classical, I would say. It would be so good to be in a classical amphitheater where you could sit around me and we can really have a more active discussion. But again, what I see that we are all learners, we are all teachers of ourselves sometimes, but we do not take often time for conceptualize the main aspects in these processes. And therefore, we started in the University of Tartu, where I come from, and in parallel it was also started in the University of Tallinn, to conceptualize the lifelong learning process and especially the innovative learning approach. Therefore, we thought that it would be good to rely on some structures. In this presentation, I thought that actually before we have to go to the main point, I have only one slide to tell you something, and everything else is just to prepare you for the main slide. We try to follow the classical approach to solve different problems. From 1984, there is this Bransford and Stein model about problem solving, ideal problem solver, where we really have to first identify the problem, then to define it using sometimes literature review as we did, and then we have the model to describe a solution to the problem. And finally, some discussion. If we are talking about a problem, then very shortly, we already saw yesterday that we have changed needs. We have quite modern, innovative beliefs in our society, also in teachers' mind. But the practices are not often in line with those beliefs and needs. And maybe very short, this is the problem. Just to tell you something for the background, I started to think on this topic when I started to think on this topic. Then I suddenly got to this memory in the end of 90s, actually last century, when I was studying at school on gymnasium level, and then this song "Wind of Change" was very, very famous, and it was always used in many cases. And I thought that actually we are in the same situation right now, that we have a wind of change, because we see that the multiculturalism, globalization, and immigration are the European-wide and worldwide problems that we are faced with. But we still are looking for solutions, and actually the solutions often should come from the universities, from the schools, and should be applied in the whole society. Then the second very important change that has been happened is that we have much more data, we have much more knowledge. We all know that the amount of knowledge in the world is growing exponentially, and it means that we cannot learn all of this knowledge. Yesterday it was also said that we have to speed up our learning process. I have already discovered on myself that every next year we have to work more than we did last year. And if we believe that we did the best what we can this year, then it's not true. Next year, always you could do better. But we need some help here, and we know that open big data is our source for solving different types of problems, and here the computers could really help us. Then one of the myths is sometimes that actually some kind of technical jobs can be given to the robots and artificial intelligence, but we already see that in some jobs where we see the benefits of humans, like developing social skills or teaching social skills. Even in that kind of areas, the robots might be very successful. For example, on this photo there, the robot Milo is teaching for autistic people social skills, and in experimental settings it has been done more successfully compared to the people, which is a bit worrying. But still, what we see from the discussions and literature is that the knowledge base we really need is a bit different today. So that it should be dynamic. We should find a way to forget much what was important maybe 10 years ago, maybe even less. And we have to admit that actually there is so much new to learn in 2 years, and we even do not know what it is. Therefore, we have to think that we have to skip something from our lives, and we have to skip something from the school education as well. So, maybe what is not so dynamic, what is not so dynamic is the skill set. So that transferable skills, 21st century skills, these are maybe those that will be not outdated in so short time as the knowledge space might be. And maybe even more important, focus should be set now on values and attitudes, which should be much more or can be much more stable. Because if we have openness for new knowledge and for learning new skills, if we have the culture of learning and we have a culture of collaboration, then we are really strong. Then we can really learn something new in a group in the future. We don't know what it is, but we are willing to learn. And I will often say to Estonian teachers in different meetings that I would be very happy if every learner in graduation will be in this situation that he or she would like to learn more than when he or she started studying. But usually it's not so, that if they will be graduating in the 12th grade in Estonia, that they are happier than in entering the first grade. So, some feedback. Talis was already mentioned several times yesterday. I don't go in depth with that, but we know that the beliefs are quite innovative, socio-constructivism oriented. But on the other hand, the practices are not, so that most common activities that the students have to do is to listen, teachers' presentations, a summary of a recently learned topic, something similar as you hear right now, which is not so good, actually. Or they check students' handbooks, and that's not what we really expect. What is innovative? From the literature review, we can find that constructivist perspective, social phenomenon, social learning, self-directed learning, and when to link those ideas, actually our colleague Robert Jan Simons already wrote about this 17 years ago. Social, contextual, self-directed, reflective construction process. But as you see, most of those references are not very new ones. So actually we have studied what should be done. And maybe the next step, and my main message here today is that we have to go a step forward to operationalize those ideas in the practical context. In order to, by supporting the discussion between the people from different groups, researchers, practitioners, and so on. While there were too many topics to discover, too many goals, learning aims, then we were thinking on systematizing those ideas a bit. And then we found a very interesting article by our Finnish colleagues from the University of Helsinki, Sari Lindblom-Ylänne and Liisa Postarev, who interviewed a lot of university teachers about their learning approach and how they are teaching. And based on that, they ended up with 10 different categories of activities. And then they merged them into 4 more generic categories. And we found that this could also lead our process to develop the framework. The framework that can be shown on one page, so that we can take all it together in order to go further into more details. And this brings me to the final main page of the presentation. This figure is also in your materials. You have that kind of small leaflet there. And I hope that you will take it with you to home and you can discuss it with your colleagues in order to operationalize it in your context. In our Estonian context, I can say how we have developed it first. As I told, We started in parallel processes in 2 main universities involved in educational sciences and teacher education in Estonia. Later on, I'm very happy that our colleague from the Ministry of Education and Research, Aune Valk, who is sitting there behind, took over this process management, I would say, so that we were starting to develop that kind of general framework. And in this collaborative work, we ended up with that kind of model that has 4 different sections. I would say even maybe 3. So at first we were thinking on the goals, what we have to achieve. And there we saw that actually there are 2 types of goals. One of them we can say is such kind of broader goals, very general ones, and too general to be evaluated. If we say that you should be open or you should be a lifelong learner, then it's too general to understand if we are now there or not. And therefore, we saw that the most important part first in this model is the learning objectives that are exactly on the level that can be assessed. And for those aspects, there are already available several assessment instruments worldwide with acceptable quality to measure what are our learning skills, level of learning skills, collaborative skills, self-directedness, and subjective well-being. And those are the 4 topics next to the classical learning outcomes-oriented topic about subject knowledge and skills. So that we will continue assessing this, but we also have to assess this. And I would like to see that once we have in the final certificate we get from the school or university, some feedback about this as well. How good learners we are. And then there is something, as we call it, school culture, something that could be seen that will lead us towards those 5 learning aims. So that this should be achieved through learners' development, teachers' development, and so on. And there are some demands for changes. So, in conclusion, we see that we have the new approach. It is a bit operationalized. We know that new innovative approach hasn't been very much applied in schools so well, and we know something how to evaluate those different skills, and we have to continue with empirical studies together, schools and universities, in order to operationalize it more. Thank you.
Thank you, Margus, for a really interesting presentation. Maybe I can ask the first question, and then we'll have questions from the audience as well. So I want to ask about the gap between progressive beliefs and traditional practice. So I know when teachers go through teacher education, they learn about all the different theories of learning. Mm-hmm. So about social constructivist approaches, self-directed learning, all these sort of things. But do you think that teachers actually know how to create a learning environment that supports it? And do they have the tools, when you think about the resources, the textbooks, everything that they use in their daily, do they know how to do it, and do they have the tools?
Mm-hmm. I think that we have very many very good teachers in Estonia and in all other European countries as well, who already do that. So that we do not have that kind of constraints. And often there are some excuses for some other teachers. And this is maybe the main question: how do you upscale it? So that how to use that kind of new innovative methods in broader scale with all the teachers. And in teacher education, of course, we teach them how to change the learning environment, and not only physical learning environment, but even more important might be the social and mental environment, so that we really are supportive. When I came here just half an hour ago, I asked my good colleague, our head of the Teachers Association of Estonia that what I should do here in front of you, and she said me that just smile. I think that it's important to understand that actually we have to support our teachers and our friends, our colleagues to be active. We have to give them good feedback. We don't have to tell that this was wrong, sit, nothing is done. So that we have to be positive. That's, I think, very important.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? Can we have the microphone here to the second row, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, thank you, Marcus, for this excellent presentation. The question that came up with me and is taking my mind all morning already: are robots and artificial intelligence will be of any help for schools in reaching your model, your plans? Because you're a professor of educational technology, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am positive and I'm optimist. So that we know that there are first experimental studies that really show that the robots can really help the teachers and the learners to become more self-directed learners as well. So I really hope that it will make change in the future. And what we see now is that we are talking about topics like smart classrooms that are really that kind of environments where we collect, let's say, the physical environment collects a lot of data about the learners, all this information about the facial changes even, and that kind of things. And all this data can be used in learning analytics. This is a powerful tool that has a lot of potential, but it's still not there. So that it's on an experimental level. And as it was discussed yesterday, I think the question how we should develop new practices in education compared to medicine, for example. I think it's exactly the same here, that actually we need much more studies before we can use the potential of robots, for example, on large scale.
We would have time for one more question. Is there? In that case, let's thank Margus Pedase so much for this presentation. Thank you. And now it's a real honor and pleasure to introduce our final keynote speaker. Andreas Demetriou is the professor emeritus at the University of Nicosia in Cyprus, and also an honorary professor of Durham University in the UK. But in addition to his career and in research and universities, he has also been an education policymaker, and so he has been the Minister of Education and Culture in Cyprus. So I think he will bring very interesting perspectives, both from research and also from the practice and policymaking. So we very much look forward to your keynote speech.
Thank you very much. And I do thank the Estonian European Presidency for inviting me to give this talk. It's really an honor. Well, in the 20 minutes that have been given to me, I will actually try to combine two things that might be very, very remote from each other. The first part of my talk is actually captured from the first title there, where I will outline a model of intellectual development and point to the practical implications for education of this model. And the second part of the talk will focus on, let's say, the political, administrative, and academic constraints of implementing any change in education and transferring any knowledge from the learning or the psychological laboratory to the classroom, to the school. Well, let me first place my talk in the context of the other talks that have been given yesterday and today. Well, there have been talks that are really very practical. The first talk, Robert Yates-Simons, or the last talk, the previous talk, the colleague from Tartu, gave talks that are really they sound very practical. They give directions to how teaching can be done. And there were other talks, also very practical in the administrative sense. The colleague from Austria, Markovic from London, speak about ongoing practices in education and how these may be measured. And there were some talks that were very remote from education, such as Michael Thomas' talk on the brain. Really being aware of research on the brain and the relations with research in my field, I don't think that however important research on the brain has any application nowadays in education whatsoever. So where my talk stands among all of these talks, it really starts in the middle. Psychological as it is, it may be considered as a bridge between very basic research, such as the research done on the brain or on the genes, and on the other hand, talks that are very practical. For example, I would ask my old friend Robert Yates-Simons, how would you see transforming a surface learner into a deep learner, given the many developmental and individual differences, constraints that operate in any classroom? We can answer this, I believe. So, how does this? Yeah. So everything is published, actually. And my slides are many more than I would cover. So you can go to the publication. It's a book that is coming out in a couple of months. The ideas are there and very fully developed. That's the first part, the psychological part of the talk. And let's say the political part is in a chapter in a book that is also there. Well, let me start from the psychological part. Can we make people smarter? Are there ways that we can increase intelligence or accelerate, speed up cognitive development? The answer is definitely yes. Every year of schooling causes an increase in IQ by 2 to 3 points of the IQ scale. Or it can accelerate development by 1/3 of a developmental level. And this adds up to a very hot topic today. The increase of intelligence in the general population in the last 100 years at about 30 degrees. So if you give a test used 100 years ago to populations of today in Europe, the average IQ would be 130. So intelligence does increase. And this is obviously related to what has been going on for 100 years in education, and of course in other aspects of the society. Societies have become much more abstract and much more symbolic, and this causes these mental processes to get strengthened. So there has been significant progress in the sciences of the mind, but the field is still very fragmented. We have 3 domains of psychology, through disciplines of psychology working on the human mind. Psychology of individual differences, cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, and of course educational science capitalizes on these three disciplines. But they all, despite what they contributed, have very serious problems that make it necessary to have an integrated theory or an integrated approach. For example, individual differences gave tests which are extremely accurate in predicting and directing academic actions. But there are many theories in the field that may be more harmful than useful. For example, Gartner's theory about multiple intelligences, which is very popular among people in education, is just wrong. There are no multiple intelligences. There is one undivided human intelligence that I will specify later on. And of course, there are many domains where you can invest your intelligence. But they're not different intelligences. And of course, I don't have the time to analyze what the negative impact of believing this might be. Also, the whole discussion and popular discussion among educational people, or probably business people, about emotional intelligence. Is there an emotional intelligence? No psychologist whatsoever in the cognitive domain or the individual differences domain would believe that there is an emotional intelligence. There is an interaction between personality and intelligence, making some people more flexible and more able to interact with others, but it's not an intelligence. So the really embarrassing thing in the psychology of intelligence is that when you go to the lab to accelerate and increase intelligence, despite what I said before about the effect of schooling, we do have gains, we do increase intelligence at the beginning up to 8 to 10 degrees of IQ, but this fades out very fast. In 2 or 3 years after the end of the experiment, nothing remains. In the cognitive psychology, I'm sure you're aware of the conceptual change movement that was very popular until quite recently. But it was not very successful either. Wrong models persist, and misconceptions persist, even among specialists. Students, everyone who taught at any level knows that students often do not learn what we teach them. And I will skip this as well. In developmental psychology, there were two giants that have influenced education extensively, Piaget and Vygotsky. In some respects, positive, and in some respects, negative. For example, in the classroom that I visited yesterday here, in a kindergarten school, the teacher showed us how she teaches mathematics, she said. And mathematics was just putting triangles on triangles, squares on squares, circles on circles, and so on. This is not mathematics. It's a misconception that is carried over from how we interpreted Piaget's conceptions about where thinking comes from, and mathematical thinking comes from. I know that constructivism is very popular among education people, as much as Gartner's theory, but we know that if teaching is not directed and well-structured, especially among the weaker students in a classroom, it will fail. So believing multiple intelligences or global Piagetian constructivism is not just the right way to go. So we need a comprehensive model that would capitalize on the positive points of these disciplines and integrate for an integrated mind in an integrated world. Well, this is actually the work that I have been doing in the last 30 years, an integrated theory of intellectual development. That's my representation of the human mind. The various colors there indicate that they do exist specialized mental processes underlying different types of relations in the environment, such as spatial relations or quantitative relations or social relations. And everything starts from there. In fact, these kind of modules exist in the brain as well. But to have the intelligence that humans have, which enables humans to deal with the unexpected, to deal with a changing environment, you need central processes that bring variations and differences together and build a self-directed, self-regulated, self-represented mind. So there are central processes. My argument is that actually there are three major central processes. Abstraction. Somebody said abstraction is the gift of God to humans. Alignment, integration, relational thought, and cognizance, awareness about these processes. This is the engine of the mind that allows abstracting relations, representing relations, and meta-representing relations. And this evolves into several cycles, from the episodic mind up to 2 years, to the symbolic mind up to from 2 to 6, the rule-based mind from 6 to 11, and the principle-based mind in adolescence. They live in a different world. Because of the awareness they have in any one of these cycles, their relation, their connection to the world is different. The episodic infant believes that they can change the world through their actions. The toddler in kindergarten, they realize that they can imagine the world. They can represent the world. And then the primary school child, they see themselves as agents of reasoning about the world. They can reason about the world. And finally, they can interpret the world. This is related to different executive possibilities in each of the cycles, but of course, time does not allow to go in deep. So, given that many of the talks yesterday were dedicated to transition, I would suggest how this is related to transitions. We have 4 different important transitions in development. The transition are 2 years from action to representation. It's possible practically for every human being, sooner or later. The transition from representation to mental rules at 6 years is attained by most of the people, about 70%. The next transition to abstract principles, to mental logic and so on, to suppositional approach to things, is not available to many. It's available only to 30% of the people. And then when we get to the last transition, to an epistemological stance towards the world, is available to very few. So that's why the difficulties that many children have, especially as we move from the kindergarten to the primary school, much more from the primary school to secondary school, and nowadays, because of the expansion of education to universities, practically everyone now in European countries goes to a university after secondary school. We also have the same problem in universities. Does it follow? We ran several experiments to accelerate and enhance, to accelerate development and enhance intelligence. For reasons that I did not have the time to explain here, we think that the crucial process of the three processes that I mentioned before is cognizance, making kids aware of the mental processes dominating in their face. We ran hundreds of studies, actually, all of them published. This is a major model. In one of the studies, we trained kids to reason on logical problems through awareness of various aspects of logical reasoning. The principles are there. Differentiate between everyday and logical meaning of propositions, differentiate between logical arguments, understanding logical contradiction, construct mental models for each type of argument, and so on. The study was done with kids of 11 years of age. We moved them, actually, by a full developmental cycle, so that while, as I said, only 30% get into the principle-based cycle, because of the experiment, 11-year-olds got to the end of the cycle in an experiment which lasted for about 3 or 4 months, and the experiment has very recently been published in Child Development. The same thing in a study that focused on mathematics, again with 11-year-olds. Here, whatever was gained because of training meta-representation and abstraction in mathematics transfer to other general processes, such as, for example, working memory. So 3 principles for education. 4 principles. Focus on the main transition mechanism, cognizant, build awareness about the cycle's representational unit and how units may be aligned. Train the cycle-specific inferential processes, highlighting their logical and metalogical specificities through related mental models. Give practice to auxiliary processes such as attention, working memory, and so on. And the most important, to face the fade-out effect that I mentioned before. Recycle in every cycle. The reason of the fade-out effect is that you do something with kids at 3, this has to be refreshed at the new level at 6, and at the new level at 11, and so on. There's no end to sustaining and making development sustainable. So, grasp the bull by the horns. How much time do you have? 2 minutes. So I said this. So critical thinking, political constraints. You know, I was impressed by how similar Estonia is when guides and people are talking about their history with Cyprus. We both have a very powerful, or a few powerful neighbors. that dominate over us, and in different parts of history, they occupy us, or they occupied us. And this makes a very different political environment for present days even. In the European Union, it's very difficult to agree what a national and what a European identity is. And this constrains actually how ministers operate. Why? For example, it was the most difficult period of my life when I was a minister, because we intended to change the curriculum all over. And when we got to changing the curriculum related to history or improving the quality of teaching Greek, the opposition attacked, because they thought that the hidden agenda was to make Greek Cypriots cease to be Greeks or start speaking the Greek Cypriot dialect rather than Standard Greek. This kind of problems are political problems, they are not technical problems, and they frame how a technical problem may be resolved. And I know very well, actually, that one way or another, they surface in all countries, big or small, for their own historical reasons. So we still have a long way to go in the European Union until we have an integrated frame that would develop, that would allow to develop effective and efficient educational policies, even for apparently educationally neutral issues. And there are administrative constraints. Educational systems are huge administrative structures with a lot of inertia. You want to do something which affects administrators in the ministry, teachers, teacher unions, and so on. So this sets the political constraints that get us to the end. Teachers must have the knowledge and skills about learning and teaching that engineers and medical doctors have about their domains. That is deep scientific knowledge about the field concerned and diagnostic and problem-solving skills tailored to the problem at hand. And I finish. For politicians, respect US citizens, especially those who still don't have voting rights, kids in schools. They will have them in the future. Learning and teaching at schools is as technical as house and road construction and as scientific as stroke or cancer diagnosis and therapy. Legislate to ensure that the teachers have the right education for this level. Keep out of technical discussions and compete for the right of every child for this kind of education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Demetriou, for a really interesting presentation. I just wanted to check, will you be around? We will have the opportunity to have lunch right after we finish. Will you be around? So if people have questions, because we have gone a little bit over time, so I'm sure people would have questions, but my suggestion would be to maybe wrap up and then we can have the conversation and answer questions over lunch, if that's okay with you.
All right.
Is that okay? Okay. With that, thank you so much to you. Thank you, everyone, for coming, for participating. Thanks, everyone who watched the video stream. And with that, I would just like to introduce, we have our final, very short video clip that we will watch together. Thank you.
Ma arvan, kui kõik ausalt ära rääkida, siis kõige algus oli lapsepõlv, mis oli mul teadlaste perekonnas. ja ema keemik ja isa ajaloolane, kes tegeles teadusajalooga, et neilt omandatud oskus või esimene mõtteviis oli see, et maailm on materiaalne, ta on objektiivne ja teadlased teatavasti kahtlevad kõiges, et sa kontrollid kõiki asju üle ja mõtled kõiki asju uuesti läbi, et sa ei usu, vaid sa tead. Ja see oli võib-olla selline alus, mis minu maailmavaadet hästi palju sättis. Edasi ülikool, kus ma õppisin matemaatikat ja matemaatika on selline distsipliin, mis tegelikult paneb aluse eelkõige mõtlemisviisile, mis aitab sul kasutada seda oma oskust kõikides teistes oma eluvaldkondades. On ta siis äri, on ta siis inimsuhted isegi ja nii edasi. Et tegelikult see matemaatiku süstemaatiline viis maailma näha on minu arust hästi nagu tähtis. Ja kõik muu on tegelikult olnud selline iseõppimise värk, et ma olen oma elus teinud 3 või 4 etappi läbi, kus igaüks on olnud erinevas mingisuguses ettevõtmises, kus ma olen kas on asutaja või siis olnud seda juhtimas. Ja nad kõik on hästi erinevad, aga ma olen alati nende käigus õppinud ja see on asi, mis mind on liigutanud kogu aeg. Et ma tahan, et mul oleks kogu aeg huvitav, et kui on mingi töö, mis enam ei ole huvitav, siis enam ei ole minu jaoks. Ma ei tee neid asju raha pärast ja ma ei tee neid asju au pärast, vaid eelkõige sellepärast, et see on mulle huvitav ja õppimise allikas.
I think the video you just saw, I think, is an example that change is really happening so quickly. Self-driving robots that deliver, packages you have purchased online. When I was a kid, I was 10 years old. I took the bus to school every day and I wanted to become a bus driver. And now you think about, self-driving vans, buses, trucks. Do you know how many jobs are affected? I know in the UK, 1 million people work in these jobs. So change is happening very quickly. I don't think we fully know what it means for education, but I think my final thought would be, hopefully the conference yesterday and today has been a step towards, better evidence-based education. So whenever we make decisions about what we need to do differently, let's just all try to remember to consider the best available evidence and then try to make the best decisions. Thank you very much for coming and look forward to continuing the discussion over lunch. Thank you.